Now we're going to switch gears here, but it might not be as much of a switch as it might seem at first, because what we're talking about next is the system by which Virginia's state government uses to talk and to communicate with each other about these policies and procedures of law, and to share data, even if it's just sharing attachments of databases and so forth. So FOIA, and one of the other reasons we're doing this panel that's coming up is because FOIA users almost always want emails about particular topics, or about particular people, or about particular time frames. And they often get back the response that it will cost a small fortune to gather that information. So with us today is Josh Heslinga, the Director of Legal and Legislative Services for VITA, the state's technology agency, and he's also that agency's FOIA officer. And he's here to tell us both why that is and isn't true, and also what the system that the state uses is actually capable of.
Hi, Megan, and everyone else out there virtually. I'll apologize in advance if my video is less than ideal. The internet connection here is less than ideal, but we're all dealing with that, I suppose. Just a little bit of background first, and then we'll circle around to describing state email systems and the question that Megan posed there, and certainly any others that people have. I had a career in information technology for about 5 years between undergrad and law school. Once I graduated from law school, I was in private practice for several years doing mostly litigation. And in that time, had the opportunity to use both discovery and litigation and FOIA to seek information from government people on the other side. So I've been on that side. I then went to the Office of the Attorney General in 2011 and was there for about 8 years, and then did the state government version of going in-house last year, moving over to VITA, where, as Megan said, I'm now the director of the Legal and Legislative Services group, which is the sort of the in-house law and policy group, and also the FOIA officer. A little bit of background about VITA for people who don't know a lot about us, because we're a little bit of sort of an inside baseball agency in that we directly serve. But VITA is relatively young. It was created in 2003 as part of a centralization of executive branch IT infrastructure. Very quickly entered into the Commonwealth entered into an IT infrastructure contract with Northrop Grumman, which lasted for about 12 years, and Northrop Grumman services ended in August of 2018. And now it's a very different situation. Over the last couple of years, VITA has kind of fundamentally transformed how the state's IT infrastructure is provided. It's now provided by a group of 8 suppliers doing different parts of the infrastructure. None of them is in sort of the all-encompassing responsible for everything sort of role that Northrop Grumman was in before for that long period of years. Generally speaking, I would say VITA is a pretty transparent agency, albeit sometimes a complicated one. And we do see regular but not overwhelming use of FOIA. From 2017 through 2019, we averaged about 62 FOIA requests per year. So I think one of the reasons for the fact that we're not people's favorite FOIA request target, and I'm definitely not complaining about that necessarily, is the legal principles that kind of govern what happens when you want agency email. So let me take just a minute and hit those. The Virginia Public Records Act and the record schedules that are promulgated under it by or through the Library of Virginia are what governs what records agencies are supposed to have and how long they're supposed to have them. That act makes agencies responsible for managing and preserving their own records. And agencies have that responsibility for preserving and also searching and producing their records under the Public Records Act and under FOIA, even if they choose to store those records somewhere else, such as on centrally provided IT systems. So if you are looking for, let's say, Department of Health email, you can't get it by requesting it from VITA. We will, our webpage already and our individual response when we get something like that is to refer people to the agencies whose records that email actually is. And that's, I think, the key principle for why VITA is not inundated with requests for other agencies' records. So with all that kind of wind up, let me talk a little bit about the past, present, and future of state email. Back in the day, the Northrop Grumman era, let's call it, the state had an email system that was based on Microsoft Exchange. So that's an email product where you have servers and in the network storage that actually holds the email data. Both of those things lived in the state's data centers on premises, that's sometimes called. The mailboxes that were made available to people under that system had certainly what would be considered today as pretty tiny limits, which would force agencies to store email elsewhere than their mailbox. For example, in PST files that they would save outside of their mailbox somewhere else. And it was up to the agencies to figure out how to manage that storage beyond and outside the mailboxes. In 2011, for an additional monthly fee per email address, there was a central email archiving product that was rolled out. And that would provide the option for addresses that were subscribed to it for comprehensive, centralized, automatic, searchable archives of email. It was an optional product. It was approximately 22% of state email users were subscribed to that product at one point during its lifetime. And then I think that sort of product is really critical for any public body, or for that matter, any private entity that wants to have a handle on its email and be able to find and produce records as needed, whether it be for litigation or FOIA or anything else. I don't really understand how you can do that well without that sort of centralized archiving capability. The changes began in 2018. In early 2018, the various agencies moved to a Google-based email system. If you've used Gmail, and I think most people have or are familiar with it, it's pretty similar to an individual user's Gmail. It's actually the G Suite product, which is a business offering that Google makes available. It does include some things beyond email. So, Google Drive was made available to agencies in 2019, along with tools like Google Docs and Sheets and the other sorts of apps that Google offers as part of that suite. Set up in such a way so that the sharing that people do through Drive is within the Commonwealth only. It's not set up for external sharing. Anyway, the move to Google email did a couple of things. First, it dramatically increased the limits, the storage available in mailboxes. There's two levels of licensing that exist. There's a 30 gigabyte level, and then there is an unlimited level, and it's up to agencies to choose which levels they want. And There also is a encrypted email option. It's a product called Virtru, VIRTRU, for cases where agencies need to encrypt email. And so that all kind of came into place in 2018. I think people are fairly settled into it at this point. That's not in use everywhere. Much of what VITA does is executive branch only. Not everything. There are some things like information security where we go a little more broadly, or the centralized procurement authority and availability of state contracts. But the central email infrastructure and system is for the executive branch. So if you're talking about legislative branch or judicial branch email, it's a different animal. But anyway, so we're on Google Mail today. Google has its own email archiving product called Vault, which is in use now. The old archiving product that was used in Northrop Grumman era was retired in March of 2020. So the archiving that exists now is through Vault. You can find information, help articles, and so forth from Google about both their general products and also about Vault specifically, if you're interested. And it is still optional for agencies whether they want to have Vault. However, probably for two different reasons, the usage has significantly increased from the old product. So now it's probably about 75% of state email users have archiving through Vault as part of their email. Vault has a fairly limited interface. It does good searching, as you would expect from Google. But what it's designed to do is search, export, and then place holds on email to help with preservation. It really doesn't do much beyond that. And so the tremendous gap that winds up existing, and this gets to the question that Megan asked, is what do you do with your email once you've searched for it and exported it? You will get an export. If I search for a term, a particular set of search parameters across, say, all VITA email, I will not get it exported even in one file. I will get it exported in multiple files per email account under Vault, which is unfortunate, but that's the way the product works. And so then I'm confronted with, all right, I've got 10, I've got 15 files that are either in Outlook PST format or in Mbox format. What do I do with those? I then need to use a different product to go through search through those to see if what I retrieved with my search terms was actually what I wanted. Organize, deduplicate, because if you've got 10 people copied on an email, then when you get 10 mailbox exports from Vault, you're going to have 10 copies of that email. So in order to do any of those kind of tasks of organize, redact, produce in a different format, you can do a little bit with Outlook and Adobe Acrobat. And that is what I think most agencies use. But really you need something else. You need like an electronic discovery, e-discovery sort of system that will do the deduplication, that will allow you to sort through, review, redact, all that sort of stuff. And that's what the state does not really have right now. I hope that will be added at some point in the not too distant future, but that is a real limiting factor. So the volume of email is certainly a factor in the costs of email searches, the time it takes to review, and then the lack of tools to really process and dig into the email that's responsive to a search. I think those are the factors that I would say are the key reasons for high costs of email searches sometimes. So that's where we are today. One other thing I'll mention is that back in the Northrop Grumman era, you would have central backups of the servers and the email mailboxes that were not intended at all or sufficient for compliance with records retention and management requirements. But occasionally agencies would look to centralized backups if something had gone wrong with their retention and preservation. In the Google world, backups are done by Google. There are no longer Commonwealth backups, and those backups are all kind of behind the scenes. So and not available to the Commonwealth, they're just part of Google's internal setup. So what the Commonwealth has is it has what's in mailboxes and it has what's in Vault, but it is no longer the case. And you might have, if somebody has got old or exported email in a PST file, you might still have something like that, but there are no backups anymore in the traditional sense. So in terms of the future state, I think some people love Google email and some people don't. They prefer the more Microsoft interface. Microsoft now has products that are more cloud-based in the same way that Google Mail is. We've all seen with the pandemic how important it is to be able to use cloud-based services. That's one of the reasons that VITA, both the transformation away from Northrop Grumman to a multi-supplier model, and also the increasing use of cloud-based services is, those are key reasons why VITA has been pretty successful, and I think state agencies have been pretty successful in making the transition to remote work during the extended state of emergency that we're still in and will be in for some time. So I anticipate there is a request for proposals, an RFP that's published right now for the next messaging provider. The current messaging contract expires in 2021. So you can read the RFP if you're super curious. I would not be surprised if it sort of continued the trend of giving agencies quite a bit of freedom to do what they need to do with their own mail without being dependent upon VITA or a vendor. And it may possibly lead to increased diversity in what agencies do. There are some agencies right now that use Microsoft Mail outside of the VITA's email scope. So, one example is the judicial branch, I believe, uses a Microsoft cloud-based email. And so it may be that more agencies have that choice within the executive branch between Microsoft and Google. But whatever results from that current request for proposals, I'm sure agencies will continue to have primary responsibility and the technological capability to do what they need to do with their email, generally speaking, on their own. So if I were to offer, that's kind of the past, what I would say is the past, present, and future of state email. Hopefully I've answered Megan's question about costs a little bit. So the other thing I wanted to do just for a couple minutes is offer a few thoughts as someone who occasionally over the years has made a FOIA request and who now deals with it on the FOIA officer side. A few thoughts about requesting email. Again, keep in mind that you're requesting from the agency whose records it is, whose email it is. It's useful, of course, to know what the public body's situation is with respect to their email system, including whether they have email archiving in place at the agency level, but not just that, at the user level, and then for the time period that you're interested in. Because if I subscribed a user to email archiving in 2018, then I'm not going to have that comprehensive archive of their email from prior to when they were subscribed to that, from 2017, 2016, for example. So there will be some variation. It's useful to try and figure that out. Keep in mind that there may be specialized situations such as encrypted email. There may be other tools for communications outside email. Maria earlier mentioned Microsoft Teams, which is available to agencies, whether or not they are on Google Mail or Microsoft Mail. Microsoft Teams is available and has some communications capabilities, SharePoint and other Microsoft products. So there are other types of communications as well. And then the last thought, and I think this is really a critical one, hopefully it's one that everybody's pretty familiar with from their own personal use of the internet and cloud-based email, is when you go to make a FOIA request for email, I would say think first and foremost about the search that you want done, the parameters of the search that you want done. Are there dates that you're interested in email from a particular month or a particular year? So are there date parameters? Are there to or from parameters? You're interested in all email with a particular company or with a particular person, that those could be used as search parameters. And then of course keywords. And there's in the Google Online Help for Vault, if you go look that up, they get into a fair amount about the syntax and capabilities of searching in Vault. So you can get down to that technical level if you want, but even if you're not going to do that, be thinking about how a FOIA officer or someone else would search for the email that you want them to find and produce for you. Because if you ask VITA for email, that's probably the first thing I'm going to come back and talk to you about is search parameters. And I would say, and I'll recognize that this is probably arguable, but I would say that if a requester is not really willing to engage in coming up with search parameters and agreeing with the agency on what the search parameters are going to be, then a request probably does not specify the records that it seeks with reasonable specificity, because there's just too much. Searching is not an exact science. There is some art to it. It does depend on what you want. And so that's really a case where the dialogue that FOIA envisions, to some extent the collaboration that FOIA envisions between a requester and a public body, should be taking place regarding search parameters. And I think you find the same thing is increasingly true in other contexts as well outside of FOIA, such as litigation. There's now much more of an expectation that people will collaborate on the parameters of discovery and electronic discovery in particular, just because of all the changes that moving to an electronic records world has introduced. So I think that kind of concludes what I had to talk about. I think I've maybe put everybody to sleep during this half hour. I don't see any open questions, but I'm happy to take questions if there are any. Here's one from Rebecca. Please explain how challenging it is to search for records when the requester uses the term any and all documents, emails, etc. That is something that does happen a lot. I don't think that really adds anything to a request. If I ask for all emails about Project X, it doesn't necessarily do a lot except make your request sound more formal, maybe, to say something like any or all. But what I think Rebecca is rightly pointing out is that doesn't give us any useful information. There's no reasonable specificity in that. Everything that matters is the rest of it. The any and all emails about what, in what time period. If I'm asking about a particular project, is there a name of the project that can be used to search? Is there an abbreviation? an internal project or matter number that will be found in emails. So if you're on the public body side of the house, one thing you can try and encourage your people to make your life easier is to be a little bit more intentional about how they create and organize their emails. So if I'm sending you a significant email about a project, use the name of the project, use the internal phrase or term that's used to refer to the project in the email, so that there's some ability to find that email later. Because agencies may very well have a need to find emails in the same way that requesters do. So it really is all about the search parameters. That's a very important point.
If I can chime in just a little bit on that question from Rebecca, I will say that one of the reasons I see people use that phrase is because they have sent messages with just records, and they have independent reason to know that there are text messages or other formats of records that are not being searched when they make the request to just say records. So they say any and all, I think, to try to get across the point that I'm talking about not just emails, not just paper records, but also these sort of more ephemeral kinds of records.
Yeah, and that's understandable to a degree. And again, it just depends. Be intentional about what you're looking for. If you're looking for a particular piece of information, what you want might not be any and all. It would probably be better to start with, I want records that show this particular piece of information. But if you're sort of doing an investigation of a particular thing, then you may want any and all emails about a particular project or something. But again, you've got to think about the parameters that are going to be necessary to find what you're looking for. I think you're muted, Megan.
Oh, I'm sure that we could talk a lot more about this, and I learned a lot. So thank you, Josh, for taking time out to, as someone said in a tweet, nobody knows more about this system than you do. So I appreciate you spending your time with us to educate it.
Thank you.
And all right.